We have to hit continue.
Okay. So are you guys able to see Wanda?
Yes, there she is.
Okay, wonderful.
And we have folks joining us now. Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait until everyone gets in because I still see the numbers going up. Thank you for your patience in this technology world. We just had a brief technical difficulty, but we're here now and we're glad that you are too. As soon as I see the numbers kind of stop rising, I will introduce our speakers and we will make up for lost time. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. We're excited to welcome new participants as well as those of you who were able to attend our conference last week. If you missed it, most of the presentations were recorded and are now available on our conference website. I am Alice Egan. I'm a clinical professor at the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work and a member of the planning committee for this conference. I'm happy to welcome you, and I'm so glad that you're here for this breakout presentation, Supporting Healthy Families, Black Communication with Jalateefa Joe-Meyers and Wanda Smith. We would also like to encourage you to stick around after this presentation for our closing panel featuring Dr. Demita Brown, Jacqueline Bojes, and Sakara Wages. We'll put the link to this panel in the chat at the end of this presentation so that you can easily find your way. Before we get started today, it's important to take a moment to honor Indigenous people by sharing our university's land acknowledgement. The University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work occupy ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Teachop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Thank you. I have a few more housekeeping details for you before we get started. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website at a later date. To access this presentation, you were required to provide your name and email. This allows us to log our attendees and email you information on CEUs for the presentation, which will be distributed by email in a week or so. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted, and also the chat function is not enabled today. However, we have a Q&A feature where you can submit questions for our presenters. Please know that due to the large volume of attendees, we may not be able to get to all questions, but we will pause throughout the presentation and take some questions. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters, Jalateefa Joe-Meyers and Wanda Smith. Jalateefa Joe-Meyers is an advanced practice generalist social worker licensed in school social work, therapy, education administration, and special education. She's trained in a multitude of research-based models that have been implemented across Wisconsin. Jalateefa's strength lies in her strong background in program development, delivery, and evaluation in both educational and community-based settings, culturally responsive practices, and intersectionality awareness that helps to build strong relationships. Jalateefa is the founder of a local nonprofit, Sankofa Educational Leadership United. SELU is an agency that has a mission to dismantle institutional racism and systemic barriers that create disparities that marginalized populations experience in Wisconsin under 3 pillars of service: education, criminal justice, and health. SELU's service delivery model was developed with the intention of lifting the most vulnerable in the community, which by research and statistics have been defined as Black women and children. Most notably, Jalateefa's contributions to her work of lived experiences as a Black woman, a single mother with a variety of socioeconomic statuses throughout her lifetime, brings a unique perspective through a dual lens of a practitioner and marginalized woman that has personally experienced institutionalized racism and developed significant racial fatigue and the impacts of that trauma on her own health. Jalateefa is passionate about anti-racist work, both as a practitioner and as a survivor. She continues to analyze service delivery practices to dismantle racist systems that impact families. Wanda Smith is president and founder of the award-winning Peace Network, Inc., a mental health consulting service where they empower individuals and corporations to live through these emotionally challenging times through one-on-one group counseling, workshops, and seminars. Community leader, activist, advocate, and award-winning community organizer in 2017, Wanda received the David Austin Memorial Award for Social Justice. Wanda has served on the Homeless Service Consortium Board of Directors for Dane County for 3 years, as a United Way FEMA board member, and a Black Leader for Brain Health board member with Wisconsin Alzheimer's Research Foundation. Wanda lives by the words of Shirley Chisholm, "I have and always will be a catalyst for change." Welcome, Wanda and Jalateefa, and with that, I will turn it over to the two of you. Oh, do we have Jalateefa and Wanda? Thank you all for your continued patience. We will just hang in there for a moment while we work to get them back. Again, thank you all for your patience. This is obviously not ideal. We are working to get our presenters back, and we'll rejoin you momentarily. There they are. If you can just unmute and Wanda, then Hannah will share the screen again.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that. We are just having technical difficulties over here. So we both want to be in the camera. Yep. There we go.
Okay, well, we are done with the introduction, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, hello. So again, my name is Jalateefa Joe-Meyers, and this is
Wanda Smith.
Yes, wonderful. So if you could go to the third slide, because the first two slides were introductions. So our goals for today, our time together, is to leave you with a positive outlook on your ability to provide services through an anti-racist model with populations like African-American women and children. We want you to gain a renewed sense of diligence and take away information from the session that you can adopt in your practices tomorrow. Go to the next slide, please. So our session focus will be on anti-racist service delivery, deconstructing European norms and values, understanding cultural precepts, race dissonance, service provider mistrust, Black communication, and strategies to support healthy Black families. So we just want to start and give you just a minute to reflect. So there's a quote on the board. It says, "No communication takes place until the other person feels heard." So I just want you to take a moment of silence to think about what this quote means to you. And since the chat is not available, I'll just give you a minute to reflect on it. We won't share out about it, but then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, if you could go to the next slide. So what do we know? There's disparities in the Black community. Racial and ethnic health disparities create persistent problems for African Americans in the United States. The health inequities impacting the Black community in Wisconsin are significant and many compared to their white counterparts. Infant birth rates and mortality rates, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes to shorter lifespan expectancies up to 7 years, less than their white counterparts. And if they experience housing instability, that can be up to actually 30 years difference in their life expectancy. We know that research suggests that repeated experiences of discrimination may cause the body to be more physically sensitive in stressful or potentially stressful situations. And in the 2020 Wisconsin, many other states, including Wisconsin, made racism a public health crisis. Wisconsin has the worst racial disparities and the most segregation in the state, in the country. And housing is not a human right. Next slide, please. So what do we have to support us? What do we have? So that's a little bit about what we know and what we have. And now about what we have. Wisconsin is a resource-rich community. This includes the importance of the continued interest in public goods and community services, the level of wealth in the community. We have always had great social services in the community. For the most part, except for the last couple of years, we've had political stability. The disruption of economic and political power, distribution, not disruption, the distribution of economic and political power. And we have evictions are at an all-time high right now. There's also mass incarceration, shelter over homes, crime, poverty, and violence, and no funding to support Black communities or Black organizations. Homelessness, many sleeping on the street and in their cars. Next slide, please. So a discussion point right now, and you can put this in the question answer. How does what we know and what we have correlated with the disparities in the community? What does the tale of two cities continue? Why does the tale of two cities continue to exist? What is your biggest fear of Blacks? Will you today examine the man in the mirror? That's your sentence. That's why I didn't know what it was. Will you today examine the man in the mirror?
Do you have the power to change policies and procedures in your organization?
So someone asked to further explain the first question. So the first two slides was what we know and what we have. So what do we know about the disparities in Wisconsin, and what resources do we have in Wisconsin, and what are some of the issues that our Black people are facing in Wisconsin? And so the first question is, how does what we know and what we have correlate with the disparities in the community? Okay, wonderful. So I think I love your comment about, and I'm going to read it. I don't know if everybody can see everybody's questions, but someone said, I believe I could change policies in my organization if I had ideas for how to structure them to help reduce disparities. I think I would have a lot of support from my colleagues. I would just need a solid idea. It is hard because my work intersects with other systems that contribute to disparities, like the legal system. I'm not sure if I could advocate for change in that system from the outside. So that is a really good response.
Yes.
Someone else said, we have resources to resolve social issues, but Black communities are still given less distribution. That is very true. Oh, and then someone else said, what we know are often implicit rules of race and class based on privilege, giving some greater access to resources based on that knowledge. Is it useful to focus on the state as a whole, or do we focus on the issues, resources that exist at the local level? That's a good, very, very, very good question. So we are focusing more on the state as a whole because many of the resources that come to our community come from the federal level. So they come from the federal level and they're distributed through the state. And then those resources, the decisions on those resources of how they are used are decisions made at the local level, but we have to be in tune to what our state is experiencing and especially the financial resources coming to the state from the federal government, because we can make different decisions on how we use those resources to really support our community. Wonderful. Well, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so I'm looking at the man in the mirror and I'm asking him to change his ways. No message can stand any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change, right? Rest on Michael Jackson, amen. So the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it is the only way forward. Next slide, please. It is important to embody an anti-racist approach to communication. In order to do so, you need to first understand the concept of race and racism. Race has been systemically and historically constructed as a variable of differences, whereby people are ascribed to designated groups based on biology, culture, and characteristics. Racism is the ideology and practice in sustaining, maintaining, and reinforcing differences based on race. And it results in racialized person being excluded from everyday points of access because of race.
Next slide, please. So we are going to talk about some universal cultural precepts, and we'll go a little bit more into these cultural precepts after we discuss them as a whole. And so immediate and extended family are really important to all communities, but especially the extended family piece to marginalized populations. A lot of African-American communities, Latino communities see extended family in different ways. The idea of the nuclear family and its construct is very much a European value. And it holds no meaning in African and Black cultures, right? And so oftentimes, especially as service providers, we are setting up structures to support a nuclear family system, and the nuclear family system is not culturally responsive to the Black community because their family structure is more inclusive of aunts, uncles, and extended family. So we want you to really think about and erase your thoughts of Western constructs of family that European people have tried to force African-American people into based on colonization, right? Mom and aunt have the same authority. Dad and uncle have the same authority. Every family, everyone, family or not, is regarded to as brother or sister. And it's not based on biological connections. In youth culture, if you work with youth, you will hear youth say a lot, describe their friends as cousins. And there may not be a biological connection to them at all, but they are expressing the connection of their feelings towards one another, their dependence on one another, their ability to trust one another, and their overall relationships. So as a social worker, I've heard many times, especially working with children and working with families, having this discussion around the nuclear family and saying, oh, well, this student said that's her cousin, and that's not her cousin. And like, even like in agitation, like they were lying about who this person represented to them. And what I really want you to understand is that those constructs of identity around the nuclear family and who's included and who is not included is very much a European construct and developed through colonization. That is not African construct at all. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So when we think about our cultural precepts in health, perception of how illness and disease and their causes are how they are perceived, the entry point to health, healing, and wellness, the use of non-traditional approaches to healthcare, information sources, and decisions about health and service support. So our perception is based on our experiences, our interactions, how we interact with society. It is not necessarily going to be the same intersectionally across cultures on how we engage with service delivery or how we engage with health. And I'm just going to give you an example, like right now, this week, yesterday, of a perfect example of this that happened. So we're in the middle of a pandemic. Some people are choosing to get vaccines. Some people are choosing not to get vaccines. And my significant other yesterday was in Gambia, and in his village, people were coming to talk about the vaccine, and the kids were running around and saying, they're trying to come kill us. They're trying to come kill us. And so there's chaos in the village because of their perception of Western medicine and a deep belief of distrust and mistrust with medical professionals, especially medical professionals of different races. And so also, I'll say a lot of that. I've heard that even within my own family right now, right? Like, don't take the vaccine. It's, you don't know what they're putting in your body, that they could be trying to kill us, because there's such a distrust based on the historical history of trauma between the white community and the Black community. So that impacts the ability to even provide things that are supporting our health, because there's so much trauma that has happened and a lack of trust that being able to move forward together, even as a community, to face something like a pandemic is difficult. Next slide, please. So one of the things that perception affects is bidirectional communication. Our bidirectional communication impacts our perceptions. Each individual perception is based on life experiences, and it impacts the provider-client relationship, right? And so we're going to go a little bit more into the ways that our communication styles and dialect really affect our perceptions and the way that we communicate with one another. Next slide, please. Next slide. So Black communication styles. Deductive reasoning is a key piece of Black communication style. Double negation is a component of Black speech, Black English. There's different dialects that are used in the Black community, both verbal and nonverbal communications that are different in the Black community than they are in the white community. And sometimes, and I'm not even gonna say sometimes, most of the time, those are perceived as negative. Next slide. So how is Black communication different? So as with all American dialects, Black English is its own rules and pronunciations and vocabulary and syntax and grammar. And so just as much as there's a different kind of dialect that we use in the Midwest than we do in other parts of the country, there's a different type of English that Black people use that has rules and syntax for language that is not always respected in the White community, right? And so our standard of English is often said to be inappropriate. And where the racism reflects in that is that there's judgment based on the way that Black people use English, not acknowledging that there is a whole linguistic style to that communication. And so we don't always say that other cultures have to learn those different dialects or communication styles. Instead, there's judgment, and Black people are told that their communication style is not okay or wrong, and they need to get better grammar. Next slide. So some other communication styles that will stand out in communication, bidirectional communication, is overlap in speech and call and response, as well as personal style and uniqueness. So when you think about the idea of code switching, many of us, well, and I've even taught code switching, and so that's something that I've had to come away from. Teaching people to code switch based on the environment that they are in, so to make other people comfortable and be able to understand them. We're one of the only places that, in the States, we do that, right? We expect other cultures to code switch and learn our main language and behaviors. And if they are not doing that, that is, it's shown as something negative. But when you think about call and response, overlap in speech, and personal style and uniqueness, and the desire to have individual style and the nonverbal communication, oftentimes that stigma is that, people are showing off, or they're cocky, or not being a team player, and it's just their communication style, not necessarily anything behaviorally that has any kind of intent. And then the interpretation from, Black people is that there's an expectation to be boxed in, almost imprisoned, to conform, to be boring, and that is the expectation. And really, when you think about culturally, one of the biggest differences is the use of deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. And so you will find that a lot of cultures that have had historical trauma go through life with deductive reasoning. So they're trying to take some information and think about what are the possibilities with that information, where inductive reasoning is more thinking about, okay, I have this information, now I am going to predict or stereotype these behaviors based on these data, which is limiting those possibilities, right? And so it's direct conflict in understanding communication and reasoning based on deductive and inductive reasoning. Next slide, please. And so another piece of communication differences is verbal and nonverbal ways to deal with conflict and emotion. Really, African Americans, and I'm just going to say Black people because everyone is not African American, but it definitely feeds into the cultural communication style. You know, more animated, louder, expressive. It's okay to openly express anger. It's okay to openly express joy. And it's quite opposite than European values of being very calm, being quiet, separate the mind, you know, from your emotions or mask your true feelings about a situation. So oftentimes that will be seen from African Americans or Black people as a cold disposition or unemotional or dishonest or sneaky. And from a white European perspective, less rational, unrefined, childish, and sometimes even violent. And so you can see the different, where those are along the spectrum, very opposite. And so if we have a deeper understanding of what those communication differences are, then we can move forward in a more unison way. Next slide.
So Black communication styles: directness, indirectness, animated, emotion, eye contact, direct when speaking, looking away when listening, turning, taking, and pause time, aggression versus assertiveness, vocal patterns, talking with our hands and body touch. Let me just say this, because this is a good one that I was just having a conversation with some Caucasian people the other day. And I was saying the biggest communication gap is when white people seem to think that all Black people are aggressive, and we are not. Aggressive is totally different from being assertive, and they get it mixed up. And if they understand that we have to be assertive because we're speaking up, it's what we want, it's what we need. And then aggressive is like, they take aggressive and assertive is like, well, it comes from the slave mentality, right? Thinking that we are supposed to just say, yes, massa. You know, you just treat me in a kind of way. Your system, your laws, your policies, all of these are oppressing me. And I'm supposed to be happy about that, right? And I'm not supposed to be angry. Anger, I want to talk about that. Anger is a normal human emotion. Let me be angry. It's a normal human emotion, but when out of control becomes destructive. I am not in that mode, right? To allow Black people to be angry because it is justified. We're not happy that you're oppressing us. You're denying us on every level. And so one other thing I wanted to piggyback off on is we talk with our body in our hands, and it offends white people, right? Our volume, we are loud. We've been oppressed for so long, and the volume scares us, right? Because we're supposed to be, oh yes, you know, they want us to have that quiet demeanor, and that is not the Black culture. We are loud. We are product of Audre Lorde. She says, speak up. Your silence won't get you nowhere. Speak up and speak loud.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So those are some takeaways when you think about Black communication styles. The summary of aggression, assertiveness, understanding the differences between those, understanding that the vocal patterns are very different, and talking with, you know, your whole body,
yes.
And touch is very normal. And that is like a first step in an anti-racist approach, is not feeling attacked by those expressions of language that are not meant to be stigmatized as angry or violent or disrespectful in any kind of way. It's really emotional vitality, and being able to express that.
Right. Let me just share a little thing. I remember when I was at a hotel, and the hotel wanted to come in and do a COVID test. And I was like, you don't need to come in here. You know, we didn't ask for room service. And because I didn't allow the hotel to come in and do cleaning, they called the police and said that they were afraid of me. It was crazy. So that was a total disconnect in Black communication. I was just saying like, hey, we sleep. We didn't ask for room service. We just don't need it today. Can you take our trash? And before I knew it, the police was at my door, escorting me out the door. It was the most communication gap. I'm telling you, it was traumatic for me. Until we understand Black communication, I was just talking up because I was like, hey, we don't need this. But they felt threatened by my tone, my body language, my hand gesture, all of that. And it was totally just inappropriate. Amen. So I just wanted to share that because that has happened in organizations where Black people come and work and be professionals. They say they hire you because you're the best. But when you get there, you can't perform at your best because they start putting all these cords around your neck, right? And wanting you to conform to the status quo or their policy and their procedures. And so I wanted to share that.
Thank you. I just looked into the questions. I apologize. But I just seen someone who asked what is code switching, and code switching is changing the language that you use, your voice, changing your voice volume, octaves, and vocal patterns to meet the person that you're talking to. And so it's in situational, what I used to teach, which I don't teach anymore, is code switching and situational appropriateness. And really, I used to teach that to kids to be able to be more successful in school. But really, what I was asking them to do is I was asking them to deculturalize, to make their white counterparts feel more comfortable with them so that they could be successful in school. I actually believe that. So, as I've gotten deeper into my anti-racist approaches, I realized that asking a child to deculturalize themselves to make a white person more comfortable and perceive them better is wrong. But I actually used to teach it at the Madison School District, which is crazy. Yes, and Tori, you said, can you speak to turn taking and pause time? So that was when we were talking about overlap in speech. The natural way to have conversations is people speak where they can get in. So they get in where they fit in, right? So there may not be pause times in speech when I may interrupt you. I may start talking at the same time that you're talking. And it's not to be rude or disrespectful. It's just a different way of communicating. And so even with some of my friends that are service providers in other cultures, I have given them opportunities to like just be on the phone with me and my mom and my sisters in the morning, right? And I would even say, now you're not going to there's not going to be a pause in the conversation where someone invites you to be able to speak. Like you have to just get in where you fit in and be able to say what you need to say, right? And I will say the first few times that she was on the phone with us, she didn't say anything, right? Because there was the timing of speech was so much different than communicating with her own family, right? And so she kind of had to she had to be willing to overlap speech and not think that that was disrespectful. And then, people just listen, right? And so if two people start talking at one time, that is okay. One pulls back, lets the other person be heard, and they piggyback after that. None of those things are out of disrespect. That is just a cultural behavior of the manner in which to be able to communicate. Next slide, please. So when you think about poor communication, it does create service provider mistrust, right? So if I'm coming to you as a client and my idea of reasoning, oftentimes we're making case plans for people. We are developing goals, to help build families. We're creating treatment plans for people. But if we come into the space with inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning, where our clients are most of the time, and I'm not saying deductive reasoning is a bad thing. It's not. That I lived through deductive reasoning, right? I'm saying that if you want to have an anti-racist approach, you should enter the room with deductive reasoning. And as you are writing about a client or even interpreting the information that they're giving you, make sure that you're communicating in a deductive reasoning way versus an inductive reasoning way, which often causes to place blame or judgment on another person that is based on our own belief system that has nothing to do with the client themselves. So also valuing their opinions, understanding the person's needs. Mistrust is learned because of the historical trauma and is closely linked to barriers, judgments, and biases. I'll even give an example of, my own taking charge of my own healthcare. And being very frustrated with doctors that were not hearing me. And when I suffered from depression, because I didn't express it in the same inductive reasoning way that many clinical people would express it, to come to this end value of this is clinical depression, I wasn't getting the help that I needed. And so making sure that you're really seeing and hearing what a client is expressing to you, not only about their emotions, but about their experiences without dismissing those or categorizing those, because categorizing them is also the inductive reasoning, right? So now you're categorizing these reasons that this person feels this way that isn't really in a line to the reality of why they are having this emotional response, nor is it aligned to the reality of how they are thinking about their current state or their current needs. So in order to be able to build that anti-racist approach, as well as build trust with clients, we really have to enter and focus on deductive reasoning and connecting with the client versus categorizing them and putting them in boxes. We also want to, stay away from that white supremacy lens, which is very much based on Eurocentric values and colonization versus embracing the values of someone else. I have the privilege of being connected. My significant other will remind me, like, if I get, and I'm thinking about more Western ways, because I grew up in Madison, and this is where I have, even though I am a Black woman and I've experienced racism, I've also adopted some of those values, and it adopted some internalized racism that I've had to cleanse myself from, right? Because I have accepted some of the negative narratives that were said about behaviors and communication styles and things of Black people, which also impacts me, right? And that also puts my self-esteem at a lower place if I'm accepting things through this Eurocentric lens. So it's really important, especially as being put in a position where we are trying to empower people and move them to self-actualization in their own life, that we be very aware about how our own perceptions and values and experiences are impacting their ability to self-actualize. Next slide, please. I'm just going to go to the question and answer real quick before we talk about racial dissonance. If there's any.
Nothing but facts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and we talked about, so I'm hoping that you have had enough information about deductive and inductive reasoning, if I explained it well enough now for you. I don't really see any other questions. Let me see. Say more about about how I expressed my experience of depression. So what I was expressing the way that I feel, but I wasn't in a negative place where about the possibilities to overcome it. Like, I wasn't in a negative place about the possibilities of overcoming it, but I knew the way that I was living every day, like, wasn't normal, and it wasn't to my normal capacity as a person, right? And so when I compared the things that I was able to juggle before and what was I able to juggle during that time, my energy level, my ability to get through the day or get out of bed, because they didn't understand how high functioning I felt like I should be, and that I definitely felt like that was racism, right? They're like, oh, you're fine. You're fine. Like, people don't do more than what you're doing. And I'm like, I'm not fine. I'm not fine, because this is not the normal me. And I wasn't willing to accept that this was it for my life. Like, this was it. Like, I'm gonna struggle getting through every day for the rest of my life. Like, that was, and I was angry. I was angry at my practitioners for not seeing me, and that doubled down on my depression. And I had to go to several different psychiatrists, several different therapists before I found my fit of someone that was culturally responsive enough to see me and to be able to help me. And it was a difficult time. And even having, my background as a social worker and being able to express myself, a lot of people don't understand mental illness to the level that I do. So then I'm like screaming at the rooftop, something is wrong and I need help. And the door was being closed. And I suffered from depression for 3 years before I got the help that I needed. and it wasn't because I didn't have good health insurance. It wasn't because I wasn't poor. It wasn't because I wasn't educated. Like, I had all those things going for me, and I could not get help, right? And so it took a long time before I got someone that would listen to me, listen to how my body was responding to medication, and be responsive and change it. Like, I was not being heard. And then the deductive reasoning piece is, okay, if these things are happening to my body as a result of the medication, then, should I be able to do this? Or should I be able to do that? Or is it okay for the symptom, even though I have more energy now, to be taking over? The symptom is now taking over in different ways. And without being able to have those open conversations with your practitioner, you can't really get help. So there needs to be some open dialogue. And so what I often tell clients of mine that I'm supporting, getting support with their doctors, is I'm like, don't even talk about it. Write it in my chart. Write everything down in my chart, because that's what I had to do to finally get heard. Like, I was writing everything down. I even was requesting my case notes from after therapy and my psychiatry appointments, even with my general practitioner. And what I was finding is that their interpretation, based on their case notes, of the information that I was giving them was totally different. And the pieces of information that they focused on, they were not hearing me. Like, they were not hearing me. And it was really a place that made me struggle. It definitely made me struggle. I'm going to move forward because I see that we are running out of time. And I just want to talk a little bit about race dissonance in service. It goes along with that story I just told you, but relationships with our clients and patients are important. Sometimes those relationships are built easily, and sometimes they're more difficult. But you definitely have to evaluate where you come from and some of your own values. Communicate in a way that is understandable. So, word matching is really good, like trying to figure out what words in your vocabulary really match the client's vocabulary, so that you're not having that dissonance of using different words that may have different meanings to each of you. Anti-racism is the active process of changing attitudes, beliefs, practices, and the goal of dismantling systemic hierarchy and oppressive power, recognizing self as an agent for change toward equity, and taking specific and direct action towards eliminating racism. Microaggressions are often communicated through language. So pay attention to how we talk in the workplace and in other social institutions, because microaggressions are, a symptom of racism, right? And make sure that we are, did you write a couple? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Go ahead. No, I was just piggybacking off of, like, when we talk about Black communication, and we as service providers working in, I'm just going to share about a couple of okay, let's talk about, let me just share a miscommunication as far as me being Black and working in a Black profession, working as a Black professional. And the thing about it is that working with my co-workers, they were feeling that I was angry, and they sort of plotted to say that, to get me fired, because they said I was too angry and I was too aggressive that they couldn't work with me. So I basically had to resign from a position that I really loved, because I were working with 4 other white case managers that didn't understand that I was working from a place of empathy, compassion, and these were my people, Black people you were serving, but you wasn't serving from a lens that I was serving from. And I was walking in the same shoes that they were walking in, being impacted by the system of oppression. So I just wanted to kind of share that, how that Black communication, even in the workplace, as well as working with service providers, there has to be a lot of training.
Yeah, and so passion, right? So passion for the work, passion for being able to lift people out of oppression. That emotional vitality is often misconstrued as aggression in the workplace. And so, you know, I've said many times throughout my whole career, I am like barely 5 feet. Barely 5 feet with a squeaky voice. How do you get aggression out of that? Like, how are you intimidated by me? I am barely 5 feet. And are you barely 5 feet too?
I'm 14.
But with a high-pitched voice, how do you interpret aggression, you know, out of that? And that is something, that assertiveness, that passion, emotional vitality is always mislabeled. I do see, and I want to answer this really quickly. Someone said, are you able to speak to the differences in communication with families who identify as Black Americans versus Black Africans? And I'm going to say that a lot of those communication styles are the same. You will see that in the US, it may be like once removed. And I'm going to say that just because it's more accepted, so it's more entrenched in the African community. So for instance, you know, we're very comfortable with calling people brother and sister at church. But some people try to, are not comfortable expressing that you're my brother or you're my sister, not in non-biological, I mean, in the community, because it's considered, it has a stigma to it, like because it's part of Black communication. You're not going to see that with people that have not been, it's forced immigration. So if they are from Africa and they were raised in Africa, they have a different idealism of what that is. And so code switching or using European language is just like flipping and learning a different language. Not that they don't feel the oppression, they definitely do, but definitely they are able to more honor, and people honor because of their accent, the difference in dialects that they use. And so even though they may be using 3 or 4 different dialects to get through life every day, it's not seen as negative as it is for Black Americans. Next slide, please. So I just want to go over some strategies to support African Americans in your client base. Next slide. So some strategies to really support African American families is involve extended family when possible. Of course, you have to ask permission from your clients to be able to do that, but that supportive network is so important, and being able to be involved in having your extended family involved is not, there's a word we use in psychology that has always triggered me. It's called enmeshed, right? So we say these families are enmeshed because they don't have boundaries. And the labeling of an enmeshed family is around those nuclear family values, those Eurocentric values, not around African values. And so that the idea of family being enmeshed is actually not a reality. in Black culture, right? Like that's a natural place of being, and it's not wrong, right? It's just been mislabeled, but we have to go back to, well, who decided that, right? Who said that if the family is connected in this way, that they are an enmeshed family? So understanding the true nature of your reactions to behaviors, your decisions, I say just lead with grace. Judge yourself before you judge others. And reflection is a key component to anti-racist service delivery. Understanding their religion or faith is critical. Showing respect by using formal words until clients or patients give permission to be informed, that you can be informal, because that's a show of respect as well. Following through, answering questions, validating, and I will say asking questions that are not intrusive, but asking questions that are empathetic, right? And so don't cross the boundaries of like asking about information that doesn't pertain to the situation, or is boxing someone into a category of, negligence or negative or carrying any kind of stigma. Ask with empathy to understand. Provide culturally appropriate food when you're having group interactions. Improve your communications with the community you serve. Understand cultural norms, because that can help you. And remember to be open and respectful to others' beliefs. And implementing empathy and compassion into your practices, so that you are always entering as a learner into any space, no matter what training you've had in the past. Entering as a learner will serve you well, right? Because you want to be able to learn the values of each client and each patient that you interact. Next slide. So I don't know if we have time for questions. No.
We do. I think, I believe that this goes until 1:30. And so.
Oh, I thought it went till 1 o'clock. Okay, well, we can go more in depth. I patted Wanda on the shoulder and said, don't tell those stories.
Oh, goodness, no. So, hey, that's good news. So we have... We have 14 more minutes, and there's a couple questions in the Q&A, and I would imagine folks may have more questions here as well.
Absolutely.
I'd like to comment on that. Do you have examples of any microaggressions that you have experienced at work? Yes. The main one is this. This is the main one. Why are you getting so angry? Isn't that it? And we know that it's known as tone policing. Come on, right? And so this was another one that was, where are you really from? Right? And you articulate so well. You speak so really well. Mm-hmm. We have to be mindful of what we are saying in the workplace. And another one is, can I touch your hair? Mm. Like, my hair is different. It's a different grade of hair, but they really want to touch your hair. Like, seriously.
Yeah. So I also see the question, any advice on how to best support Black clients whose families don't believe in mental health issues? That there is a stigma around mental health issues in the Black community. But there's a stigma really on all health problems in the Black community, right? And part of that reason is because being survivors of historical trauma means that you don't have the privilege to be sick. You don't have the privilege to be weak. You don't have the privilege to break down. So it's not accepted because it hasn't been, it goes against every survival skill that you have, right? And so if you accept that these things are wrong with you and you need to seek help, you're not going to survive. So that is like entrenched, right, into the Black community, is that you have to survive. That means you have to overcome. There's always going to be barriers. There's always going to be barriers. So you can't say, oh, I have diabetes, or I have mental health issues, or anything, because you have to get up and walk anyway. You have to walk anyway when your feet hurt. You have to walk anyway when your legs hurt. You have to see anyway, even when you can't see. You know, that to figure out a way to see even when you're blind, right? I'm like, that is really the idealism, because it's about survival. And because of historic trauma and institutionalized racism, families are not thriving. They're surviving, right? And so if you are a practitioner trying to help a family understand mental health and understand the resources that they have available to them, you have to first make them feel safe, right? And secondly, you have to help them to understand that you are walking next to them, not in front of them or behind them, and that you are kind of holding their hand through this process, and that you understand that they are in survival mode. They are in survival mode. And until you reach that point that you can have that open conversation with them and really connect with them about being inside, moving from survival mode to being in a safe place where they can heal, that is really when you will see transitions happening, because it has to be a safe place. Let me see if there's any other questions on here.
I see a question here. Any advice for us who work in a majority white organization? I'm tired of having to be assertive and accepting behaviors of others to keep my job.
Absolutely. And I would say, don't accept it. Don't accept it. And that is going to be hard. I've definitely been in that position many times. And, you know, honestly, I would be like, so God wants me to learn something in this place, right? Like, I'm experiencing this, I'm experiencing all these microaggressions, I'm experiencing all this racism. I wanted this job, but the experience is horrific. And even sometimes affecting my client base, because if I need something from my colleagues to be able to serve my clients well, and I'm experiencing microaggressions from my colleagues, that impacts my ability to deliver services, right? And so you really have to be able to just stand strong. And it took me a long time to be able to do that. I'm not saying like that's a walk in the park. It took me a long time to be strong enough to be able to say no. I'm going to bring my whole self to the table, whether you like it or not. And I'm going to advocate, whether you like it or not, for the needs of the people that I am serving. And that does take a lot. It does take a lot to get to that place and not always feel like you're the one teaching. And it also, I got to the place where within my, that I wasn't going to teach anymore. Like, it's not my responsibility. And I said, I'm not going to teach you how to not be racist, even though I'm doing this anti-racist workshop. I had gotten to a place where I wasn't going to do it. And especially if I had taken a journey with colleagues where I felt like we had already gone through the journey and then racist things still occurred, I really had to step back. And that caused conflict and dissension right? In the community that I was serving, and, you know, some of the partnerships that I had, and we had to heal from that. We had to heal from that. So we're in a much better place today. We are in a much better place today. But I did have to get to the point where I said, I think you know enough to be able to make anti-racist decisions on your own. Like, I think we've gotten to that place, and you need to take responsibility for that and not lean on me to make you comfortable or make your decisions okay, right? Or talk you through it and make you feel better about it. I just got to a place that I wasn't going to do that anymore. How do you work with an interdisciplinary team when you feel like racism is a part of it, right? Well, that happens, right? And I would say definitely have good friends and mentors that you can call and process through those things with. You know, my cousin is a psychiatrist, and she lives in Arkansas, and we process through stuff together all the time. Like, we are each other's service provider support network. Wanda and I process through things together all the time, right? And so it's really important to be able to have somebody that you can call and be like, wait a minute, I'm feeling some kind of way about what just happened. I'm trying to reflect on my reaction to that. Am I tripping, or should I be mad? Am I tripping, or should I be mad? And so when you have somebody that you can go to that will be honest with you, and because it's such an emotional roller coaster, fighting racism, working within institutionalized racist systems, and then being able to come out of that whole and support clients through that. So you definitely have to have somebody that you can face with and connect with. So I see what's about the, are we out of time, or can I keep talking?
You can keep talking. You have 5 more minutes.
Okay, I saw that link and I wasn't sure.
Oh,
okay.
goodness. So, I see a couple folks asking about further resources or further learning around communication and linguistic style differences. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So Mona Lemoyne she has tons of research around Black communication. And I started actually learning more about Black communication. I had to research it, right? I had to really dig deep into it because I was raised in a racist system. So I didn't even value my own communication styles. Like, I thought that they were wrong. And the reason I started to research it is I was working for a community center, and I was moving out of direct practice into a supervisory role. And all the kids that I was working with were African American. But I could not keep anybody in that position. So I kept going back to the direct service position because the kids would run the person out of there. They would run them out of there. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what is the difference between me providing that group and this person providing that group? Like, I didn't know. So I started researching, like, what are some of those practices that I didn't have names for, that I was using in everyday interactions to connect with children and families. And so that is actually when I went on that journey to learn about Black communication, so I could put language to the things that I was doing every day, but I didn't have names to it. And Mona Lemoyne's work really helped me with that. I think you can, I'm looking at the question, our small team contains one person of color. How can I best support my coworker of color? I really think not only just connecting with them, but not being afraid to speak out when and help their voice be lifted in that meeting or in that interdisciplinary meeting or, at that workplace. Because oftentimes it's easy to have groupthink. And that is what feels most isolating when you're in white environments, right? You're like, is everybody freaking crazy in here but me? But it's really a cultural disconnect, right? And so not having anybody to really understand, or even if they do understand, willing to speak up and validate your emotion or the way that you are entering into that practice to support clients. So I think it's really important for you to be able to just validate people and be able to validate them for everything that they bring to the table, and not just when they are working within white constructs. Like, don't validate their their ability to articulate, or what I mean, things like that, because that's offensive, right? That's offensive. I had one of my good friends, but she told me one day, she was like, Jalateefa, you're the whitest Black person I ever met. And I was offended. Like, that was like shots fired. And I was like, why did you think that was a compliment? Like, that's not a compliment. And she was just like, no, I was just saying, because you're able to seamlessly move between different groups of people. Like, I see that you're able to seamlessly move and that you change your language and behavior based on where you are. And I was like, okay, so me giving up pieces of who I am to make other people comfortable is not a compliment. Like, don't compliment me on that. Like, that's painful. That's something I do to survive, not something that I really want to grow on, right? Yes.
And just to piggyback off of what she just said, I have like white sisters who I said, are you really white? Because we're so much alike, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You sure you're not Black?
Yeah. I think it comes up a lot around people feeling like you just don't really understand, what the history of a Black person really is, and what the struggle that they have gone through. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes people do say, you just don't get it. Like, you can't walk a mile in my shoes, right? And that is true. But what you can say is that you don't know. Like, you don't know. And that you're entering as a learner. And you want to learn more about what they're experiencing so that you can support them the best way that you can. Like, entering as this empathetic support person that, no, I don't get it, because I've never had to live on the street. I've never had to go hungry. I've never had someone not like me because of the color of my skin. I've never, what I mean? Like, honor that you don't know what that feels like. Yes. But also embrace that person to be able to bring their whole selves to the table and lend an empathetic ear and say, I'm willing to learn from you based on what your experiences have been, and can you teach me? I think that is really the place to enter.
That's the direction.
Absolutely. Let's see. How can we support children in schools that are? Oh, that is really good. I'm so glad you asked this question. So the question is, the public education system teaches proper grammar, sentence structure, etc. How can we support children in schools that are learning this and the school continues to correct this? Right. So do not try to change kids' language. You can teach them mainstream English. So this is mainstream English. And tell them up front that not only are you teaching mainstream English, but you are assessing them on mainstream English. Their dialect is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with the way that they speak, the way that they express themselves. You're teaching them another set of tools, another language. Like you're actually teaching them how to be bilingual and bicultural, right? We don't necessarily honor that all the time with African-American kids, but that is really what you're teaching them, to be bicultural and bilingual. And so being upfront with saying that, you're teaching them in this mainstream English way, but you also have to honor their dialect. You have to say it. You have to say that you understand that. You need to understand in a school setting, you really should understand the syntax and rules of Black communication. And that should also be taught so that they know the differences, right? And then they can choose. You can say, okay, I'm giving you this spelling test today, and I'm expecting you to respond with mainstream English, right? So then you're honoring their prior knowledge, and you're also honoring their growth to be able to learn something new, right? And then the last thing I want to say about that, why I'm so happy you brought that up. Oftentimes, kids are put into speech and language special education based on the fact that their dialect is Black communication. Ooh, that's something that my heart palpitates just when I think about it, because it drives me crazy, because I've seen so many kids that are like in kindergarten. So you're in kindergarten, this is your inductive language that you were raised with. You are entering into a school system where people may not communicate the same way that you do, but you're learning some new cultural norms. You're learning some new language, and it does not mean that they're behind, right? And so the way that we assess children's knowledge through a Eurocentric lens, we see them as, they're special education. They need speech classes, or they need some support of understanding behaviors, and they actually don't. Whenever you are learning a second language, research will show that children that are bilingual, they develop language a little later, but so it will look like they're delayed because they're learning more than one language at a time, but they're not. And when they exit, they're able to balance both of those languages, right? And that is what Black kids are doing, but they don't get credit for it. And so we're like, all the Black kids are behind in reading. All the Black people are behind in English and language arts. And that's not actually true. There's not a deficit there. What it is they are bicultural and bilingual. So when they emerge, it's a little bit later, because they're in a Eurocentric environment.
Well, Jalateefa and Wanda, I hope you've been reading all the positive comments. People saying it, you all can't see it, but see it. People saying this has been their favorite workshop, and how helpful and useful and interesting this information was. So we sure appreciate it. And we also thank our audience for hanging in there for those early minutes of technical.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So I just really want to extend to you, Jalateefa, and to you, Wanda, a big thank you for sharing your expertise and your information with us today. And thanks to everyone in attendance for your commitment and efforts to confront racial injustice. You will be getting an email with a link to complete an evaluation, and then a separate email regarding CEUs. I posted in the chat a link to our closing panel, and thank you again for helping us make this virtual conference an enjoyable learning experience for everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you
so
for
much.
having us.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.